In 1962, in the waters near Cuba, a Soviet submarine sat in the dark with a nuclear torpedo on board. In 1979, computers in a U.S. command center suddenly showed hundreds of Soviet missiles heading toward North America. In 1983, a radar officer near Moscow watched his screen light up with what looked like an American nuclear strike. In that same year, a NATO command post exercise rehearsed the road to nuclear war in such realistic detail that Soviet analysts wondered if it was a cover for a real first strike. For moments. For misunderstandings. For times when a few decisions by a handful of humans may have stopped World War III. This is the story of how close we came to ending our world by accident. Welcome to Dark Military Archive. The Cold War is often remembered as a long, frozen standoff, missiles and silos, leaders staring each other down, decades of tension that never quite boiled over. But if you zoom in, the picture looks very different. You don't see a smooth, stable balance. You see a system full of glitches, misunderstandings, bad data, and tired people under pressure. Nuclear weapons were built on the assumption that everyone would behave rationally. But the systems around them were full of ways to fail. In this video, we're going to look at 4 nuclear near-miss incidents. A NATO exercise that looked too real. A radar warning that cried wolf. A submarine vote deep under the sea. And a computer glitch that almost lit up the sky. Each one is a separate story. Together, they show how thin the line really was. Let's start in 1983. The early 80s were one of the most dangerous phases of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was under pressure at home, its leadership was aging, and NATO was deploying new Pershing II and cruise missiles in Europe, faster, more accurate systems that could hit Soviet targets in minutes. In Moscow, the KGB launched Operation Ryan, a massive intelligence effort to detect signs of a Western nuclear first strike. The goal was to see it coming before it happened. Into this atmosphere came a routine NATO command post exercise called Able Archer 83. On paper, Able Archer was just that, a drill. Officers practiced how they would move from conventional war, to chemical weapons, to limited nuclear use, and finally to large-scale nuclear strikes. They tested new nuclear release procedures and encryption formats. Messages were realistic, codes and signals looked different from past exercises, and high-ranking officials were more involved than usual. From inside NATO, everyone knew it was a simulation. There were no real missiles on the move, no actual warheads being armed. But from the Soviet side, the view was very different. Intelligence analysts watching NATO saw unusual patterns. More encrypted traffic than normal. Command posts going into intensive activity. And air bases behaving as if they were preparing for something serious. Some historians argue that Soviet leadership briefly considered the possibility that Able Archer was not just a drill, but a cover for a real nuclear first strike. In response, according to Western assessments, some Soviet nuclear forces in Eastern Europe were put on higher readiness. Bombers were prepared. Units moved quietly closer to the edge. The situation may have escalated further if NATO had mirrored those moves with its own show of force. Instead, one key NATO officer, General Leonard Perutz, noticed unusual Soviet activity and chose not to escalate in return. Able Archer ended. The warheads stayed in their silos, and the exercise that had looked so real faded back into the background. Whether we were truly minutes from disaster or just inside a frightening feedback loop is still debated. But it showed how easily one side's drill could look like the other side's first strike. Later that same year, the danger came not from a big exercise, but from a single radar officer in a new satellite system. On the night of September 26, 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was on duty at a Soviet early warning center. His job was to monitor a satellite-based system that watched for the infrared signature of American missile launches. Just past midnight, the alarms went off. the system reported that the United States had launched a single intercontinental ballistic missile toward the Soviet Union. Then another. Then a few more. On his screen, the system showed what looked like a small volley of American nukes on their way. If this was a real attack, Soviet doctrine said a retaliatory strike might have to be launched quickly, before the incoming missiles arrived. Petrov had to decide how to classify the warning. He knew that the satellites were relatively new. He also knew that a real US first strike would probably involve many more missiles, not just a handful. He made a choice. He reported the event as a false alarm. It was a gamble, and he knew it. If he was wrong, and the sky really was full of incoming warheads, he might have just helped his country lose a nuclear exchange without firing back. But he was right. The warning was caused by a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds, confusing the satellite sensors into thinking they'd seen missile launches. No missiles were actually in the air. No war started that night. Petrov did not single-handedly save the world in a Hollywood sense. But his decision not to trust the first alert, not to panic, helped prevent a false alarm from turning into something far worse. To see how much difference one person can make, we need to go back to 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis. While the world focused on photographs of missile sites in Cuba and public speeches at the United Nations, another drama was playing out underwater. A Soviet submarine called B-59 was operating near Cuba. It was diesel-electric, not nuclear-powered, and conditions on board were brutal. Heat, noise, and limited communication with Moscow. What most people on the surface did not know was that B-59 carried a special weapon. A nuclear torpedo. During a tense encounter with U.S. Navy ships dropping practice depth charges, the crew of B-59 was shaken, exhausted, and unsure whether war had already begun. On board, the decision to launch the nuclear torpedo required agreement from 3 officers: the captain, the political officer, and the flotilla commander on board the sub, Vasili Arkhipov. 2 said yes. 1 said no. Arkhipov refused to give his consent to launch. From his point of view, they did not have clear confirmation that war had started. Firing a nuclear torpedo at the U.S. fleet could trigger the very global war they were trying to avoid. His no broke the chain. The torpedo stayed in its tube. The submarine eventually surfaced and withdrew under escort. How different would history look if that vote had gone the other way? We cannot know. But the fact that one man's refusal stood between a cornered submarine and a nuclear strike is one of the most chilling details of the Cold War. Our final incident takes us to 1979 and a U.S. early warning system that briefly thought World War III had started. Inside a command center linked to NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, computers suddenly displayed a terrifying scenario. A massive Soviet nuclear strike, hundreds of missiles headed toward North America. Alert levels rose. Some bomber crews were told to get ready. Missile crews in underground silos prepared to receive possible launch orders. But when analysts checked the radar feeds and the satellite data, they found nothing. No missiles. No launches. No attack. Something was wrong. An investigation revealed the culprit. A training tape. A scenario file used to simulate a Soviet attack had been accidentally loaded into the live warning system. The computers were faithfully reporting what they saw, but what they saw was fiction. For a few minutes, a piece of training data looked like the start of World War III. Once the error was found, the alert was canceled. The tape was removed. Protocols were adjusted. But the lesson remained. In a world where minutes matter, a simple technical mistake can bring nuclear forces to the brink before anyone has time to think. Able Archer 83. The Petrov incident. The B-59 submarine. The NORAD computer glitch. For different countries, for different systems, for different kinds of failure. A drill that looked too real. Sensors that mistook sunlight for missiles. A submarine commander forced to vote on the end of the world. And a training tape pretending to be reality. These stories don't mean that we were always seconds away from guaranteed annihilation. But they do show that nuclear stability often depended on fragile systems, incomplete information, and the judgment of a few people under pressure. In the end, the Cold War did not end in a firestorm. But it wasn't because the machines were perfect or the plans were flawless. Many times, we were simply lucky. If you want to see deeper dives into each of these incidents, check out the individual episodes and shorts here on Dark Military Archive. Thanks for watching. And remember, history is full of moments when the world almost changed in a single night.